Crazy Horse. Born sometime around the 1840s in what is now called South Dakota, the prominent leader of the Oglala Lakota tribe, renowned for his fearless leadership and strategy in the Native American resistance against U.S. expansion into the Great Plains. He's best known, of course, for his role alongside Chief Sitting Bull in the well-known Battle of Little Bighorn, June 1876, where they managed to achieve a rather stunning victory against General George Custer's 7th Cavalry of the U.S. Army. But it was Crazy Horse's deep connection to the Black Hills and his commitment to preserving the Lakota way of life that drove his resistance efforts, refusing to ever sign a treaty with the U.S. government. Tragically, his life ended under what seems to be rather controversial circumstances in 1877, while in military custody at Fort Robinson, Nebraska. But today, Crazy Horse is celebrated as a symbol of Native American pride and resistance, immortalized by the ongoing Crazy Horse Memorial Project in South Dakota, honoring his legacy and the heritage of indigenous peoples across North America. Welcome to the channel, everyone. Well, we're doing another somewhat modern history today. I've been enjoying doing things that are a little bit more within our modern time period. Not quite up to the point of the world wars and all that, and I'm not sure if I will get to that, but if you want to see me do the world wars, why don't you tell me in the comments, or just tell me what you want me to do. Give me some ideas. The list is already quite exhaustive, but hey, we may as well add to it. Now, of course, as always, do the whole like, subscribe thing, you know what to do. But I'm going to just say before I start this video about the names and terminologies in language. Now, I could go through this whole thing using the native pronunciations and names, but there are two problems. The first being that generally we know these subjects of the talk by their English names. Think about Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, these sorts of things. If I was to quote their native names, you may not know who I'm talking about. So there's that. But the second is the pronunciations that I did make the effort to look up, and I did look them up, were unfortunately not very unified. One says it one way, another says it a different way, and everyone's got a different opinion, each claiming that they are correct. So, for the sake of everybody having an easier time of it, we're just going to be using the English names. Now, with that in mind, let us begin the life of Crazy Horse. So whereabouts do we begin? Well, sometime between 1840 and 45. We're not quite sure. There's no real record of Crazy Horse's birth, but we generally have a consensus between those years of 1840 and 45, give or take. Now, there was another native, He-Dog, who claimed that he and Crazy Horse were both born in the same year during the same season. And when was He-Dog born? Well, according to census data and other interviews, this gives us a date of around 1842, smack bang in the middle of the estimate. Pretty safe. Now, on to another. Encouraging Bear, an Oglala medicine man and spiritual advisor to Crazy Horse, weighs in on the issue too. And he says that Crazy Horse was born, I quote, in the year when his band, the Oglala, took 100 horses, in the autumn of that year. Now, this is referring to the Lakota calendar. Now, the Oglala winter counts. Cloud Shield recorded the theft of 100 horses, possibly supported by accounts from the American Horse and Red Horse, placing the year around 1840 to 41. Of course, there are family members too from the Cheyenne River Reservation who pass down oral histories which are not always accurate, but, well, they're better than nothing, aren't they? And these oral histories suggest that he was born somewhere around the spring of 1840. In fact, on the night of his death, his father, who unfortunately outlived his son, told Lieutenant H.R. Lemley that his son was born in 1840. So you see how we have a few different narratives here. Now, from what I've seen, I can't quite decide on either one. So we're just going to wind it back to the estimate of 1840 to 45. Now, what about his parents? Well, they came from two different bands of the Lakota division. His father was Oglala, and his mother was Miniconjo. His father, who was also named Crazy Horse, was born in 1810. Of course, at birth, Crazy Horse was not called Crazy Horse. He was actually called Among the Trees, which was a way to sort of signify his bond with his mother. Now, his mother, who was named Rattling Blanket Woman, born in 1814, also gave him the name Curly Sun, or light hair, because of his light and curly hair which resembled hers. But sadly, the mother did not live to see her son grow too old, and she passed away when Crazy Horse was only 4 years old. Well, that's a shame, isn't it? But let's talk a little bit about Rattling Blanket Woman, who lived from 1814 to 44. She was the daughter of Black Buffalo and White Cow, who was also called Iron Cane. Her siblings included Lone Horn, who died in 1877, Good-Looking Woman, born in 1810. That's a pretty good name, isn't it? And a younger sister originally named Looks At It, born in 1815, later renamed to They Are Afraid of Her. I'm loving these names. It's really interesting, isn't it? Now, Rattling Blanket Woman has been identified as Miniconjo and a sister of Spotted Tail, who became the head chief of the Brule. She may have also belonged to Lone Horn's family, who was a leader among the Miniconjo, and she was described as beautiful and reportedly a very fast runner who was universally admired by all within her community. So, according to the Encyclopedia of North American Indians, as by Frederick Hoxie, Crazy Horse wasn't the first one to have that name. In fact, he was the third in his family to be named Crazy Horse. He also had a love interest, who was named Black Buffalo Woman, but unfortunately, she married another, called No Water. Must have been a thirsty marriage, I suppose. Well, Crazy Horse did once convince her rather, to run away with him, prompting No Water to begin an altercation and chase after them. When No Water found them together, he shot Crazy Horse in the face, leaving a lasting scar. We will get back to that story a little bit later in some more detail, but we'll move on from it first. Well, it wasn't over for him. He survived, and Crazy Horse actually married twice, first to Black Shawl, and then later to one Nellie Larrabee, who was allegedly sent by the military to spy on him, which makes the marriage more than a little suspicious. Could you imagine a marriage where your wife is always trying to figure out your secrets and what you're doing? I can't imagine that. Now, his only daughter, called They Are Afraid of Her, was born to Black Shawl, but sadly she didn't make it past the age of 3, so rest in peace to her. Now, where did Crazy Horse live? Well, he lived on a Lakota camp in what is now Wyoming, with his younger half-brother, Little Hawk, the son of Iron Between Horns and Oglala. Little Hawk was also the nephew of their maternal step-grandfather, Long Face, and cousin to High Horse. In 1854, Lieutenant John Lawrence Grattan, along with 29 U.S. soldiers, arrived at the camp to apprehend a Miniconjo man accused of stealing a cow. But here's the problem. The cow had wandered into the camp, and, well, may as well slaughter and eat the cow. The meat was then shared among all the people. Of course, no one really saw this as a problem. Of course, Grattan saw it as a problem. He demanded that Conquering Bear, the Lakota leader, turn over this supposed thief. But Conquering Bear refused, but he did offer a horse as compensation for the cow, which is not a bad deal. Well, as Grattan returned to his troops and Conquering Bear turned away, one of Grattan's men fatally shot Conquering Bear in the back. Now, this was given no orders to do that. He was just firing at will. And in retaliation, the Lakota killed all 30 soldiers, and an interpreter who wasn't even part of the military. He was just a civilian hired out on contract for the day. Bad time to be a translator. Well, this event was known as the Grattan Massacre, and as you can imagine, it did not do wonders to heal the rift between the natives and the newcomers. So, Conquering Bear, he didn't survive either, and after his death, Crazy Horse began to experience a kind of trance-like vision, and quite a few of them. Well, seeking guidance, Curly, as Crazy Horse was then known, went on a vision quest, and he did this without following the traditional preparations. And in his vision, he saw a warrior on a levitating horse, a horse that was gliding through the air. The warrior wore simple clothing, had no face paint, and his hair hung loosely with a single feather and a small brown stone behind his ear. Now, despite hails of arrows and bullets flying past him, neither the warrior nor the horse he was mounted on were harmed. In the vision, a thunderstorm broke out, and the warrior's companions tried to restrain him, but he broke free, struck by lightning that left a lightning mark on his cheek and a white hailstone-like spots all over his body. The warrior told Curly that if he dressed simply, avoided taking scalps, and refrained from keeping war trophies, he would remain safe in battle. And so, after the vision, Curly heard the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk, just to top it all off. Sounds pretty poetic, doesn't it? Well, when Curly's father interpreted the vision, he explained that Curly was actually the warrior he saw in the vision, kind of like a third-person view, a view of what he could become, his ultimate potential. The lightning bolt and hailstone marks would be his war paint, and he must follow his warrior's guidance to stay safe in combat. This vision largely held true throughout Crazy Horse's life, as he rarely suffered any injuries in battle, except when he took 2 scalps and was wounded by an arrow. It's one way to test the theory. They told him not to take the scalps. Later he was injured, however, in the face by no water during that confrontation, and ultimately restrained by a fellow tribesman, possibly Little Big Man, when he was fatally stabbed with a bayonet on the night of his death. Now his father, Oglala, accompanied him to what is now Sylvan Lake, South Dakota, where they engaged in Hembleka, or vision quest. A red-tailed hawk guided them to their designated location in the hills, because to the towering trees in the Black Hills their visibility was often obstructed. And so Crazy Horse positioned himself once more between the two elevations at the summit on the hill to the north and east of the lake. Oglala resided to the south of Black Elk Peak, yet to the north of his son. Now Crazy Horse's vision this time initially led him to the south, which, according to Lakota mythology, is the destination where everybody must go after death. He was returned and sent westward towards the thunder beings, the Wakians. He received a medicinal package for lifelong protection, and one of his animal guardians would be the white owl, which according to Lakota mythology symbolizes longevity. He was also presented with his battle face paint, which comprised of a yellow lightning bolt along the left side of his face and the white powder. He would moisten this and apply marks to his sensitive areas. Once dry, the marks resembled hailstones. His facial paint resembled that of his father, featuring a crimson lightning bolt descending the right side of his face and 3 red hailstones on his forehead. Crazy Horse applied no makeup to his forehead and did not don a war hat. However, he received a holy song that remains sung by the Oglala people, even to this day, and from that time on, he was designated as a defender of his community. Now, of course, we do have one source that provides somewhat of a contemporary description of him from Black Elk, who was a modern-day relative of Crazy Horse. Now, this is recounted in the Black Elk Speaks book by John Nearhart. Now, before we quote anything from that source, I will say that the work was written in the 1930s, which is, of course, quite after the life of Crazy Horse, and it comes with a little dose of controversy, a little sprinkle of that on top. Apparently, there are accusations that some parts of the book were exaggerated or changed around to make it a bit more palatable to the intended audience, rather than just presenting a history in a strict sense. So if you do go and read the book, which I do recommend you do, go ahead and read it, and just read it with that in mind. Now, let's hear from Black Elk. When I was a man, my father told me something about that vision. Of course, he did not know all of it, but he said that Crazy Horse dreamed and went into the world where there is nothing but the spirits of all things. That is the real world that is beyond this one, and everything we see here is something like a shadow from that world. He was on his horse in that world, and the horse and himself on it, and the trees and the grass and the stones and everything were made of spirit, and nothing was hard, and everything seemed to float. His horse was standing still there, and yet it danced around like a horse made only of shadow. And that is how he got his name, which does not mean that his horse was crazy or wild, but that in his vision it danced around in a queer way. It was this vision that gave him his great power, for when he went into a fight, he had only to think of that world to be in it again, so that he could go through anything and not be hurt, until he was killed at the soldiers' town on White River. He was wounded only twice, once by accident, and both times by someone of his own people, when he was not expecting trouble and was not thinking. Never by an enemy. End of the account from Black Elk. Well, Crazy Horse also obtained a black stone trinket from a medicine man named Horn Chips to safeguard his horse, a black and white pinto designated Inyan, rock or stone. Now he positioned the stone behind the horse's ear to amalgamate the medicine from his vision quest with Horn Chips, ensuring unity between himself and his steed whenever they charged into combat. But there is a prevailing narrative that, however, asserts that Horn Chips presented Crazy Horse with a magical stone that shielded him from gunshots. Consequently, Crazy Horse was never struck by a gunshot. Suppose that's proof that it works. Furthermore, Horn Chips is kind of an incorrect designation for this medicine man, but notwithstanding its persistent misapplication since its initial publication since 1982, his Lakota name was Waptura. Yet the government assigned him the moniker Chips, leading to his designation as Old Man Chips. Horn Chips was one of his sons, also referred to as Charles Chips. Now, once again, we're going to read from the work of Nearhart, from that book that we just had the source from. Another kind of description of his personality, kind of marked by this humility and solitude, but also a little bit of mystery. It's also reported that he exhibited quite a bit of generosity towards the impoverished, the elderly, and children. From the text we read, he was a queer man and would go about the village without noticing people or saying anything. In his own teepee he would joke, and when he was on the warpath with a small party, he would joke to make his warriors feel good. But around the village, he hardly ever noticed anybody, except the little children. All the Lakotas liked to dance and sing, but he never joined a dance. And they say nobody ever heard him sing either. But everybody liked him, and they would do anything he wanted, or go anywhere he said. End of the account. Right, I'm going to rub my hands together a little bit while I bring you into the section about the wars. Of course, you don't get into these sorts of things without talking about the military aspect. And this is where Crazy Horse perhaps shone his brightest. Now, of course, we all know that this time was a pretty chaotic one. Of course, I'm assuming that people have some kind of background on what the mid-19th century was like on the frontiers. Now, during the late 1850s and 60s, Crazy Horse's reputation as a warrior and his prominence among the Lakota increased. Among the circles who were out there in the great unknown, well, he was quite the name. Definitely somebody that you wanted on your side, too, that's for sure. Now, the Lakota recount narratives about him in their oral traditions, which is where we get 90% of our information from. And from that information, we can deduce that his initial kill was a Shoshone raider who had slain a Lakota lady preparing buffalo meat beside the Powder River. Crazy Horse also engaged in multiple confrontations between the Lakota and their historical adversaries, including the Crow, Shoshone, Pawnee, Blackfeet, and Arikara within the Plains tribes. And yes, don't think for one moment that before the European settlers came along, conquerors, colonizers, whatever you want to call them, that everything was all peace, love, and pipe smoking. Well, it was most certainly not. Once again, war is as old as time, transcends all cultures, all peoples. Conflict is a general rule, not an exception. With that being said, let's move on. Now, in 1864, following the decimation of the Cheyenne and Arapaho by the 3rd Colorado Cavalry in the Sand Creek Massacre, the Oglala and Minaconjo bands formed an alliance with them against the U.S. troops. Crazy Horse then participated in the Battle of Platte Bridge and the Battle of Red Boots in July of 1865. Now, in 1865, because of his combat prowess and benevolence towards the tribe, Crazy Horse was designated as an Ogle Tankaun, a shirt wearer, kind of a name for a war leader by the tribe. Of course, this is a great honor, and you don't get that sort of title easy. Now, on December 21st, 1866, Crazy Horse and 6 other warriors, comprising of both Lakota and Cheyenne, lured Captain William Fetterman's 53 infantry and 27 cavalry soldiers under Lieutenant Grumond into an ambush. You see, they were dispatched from Fort Phil Kearny to investigate a prior assault on a lumber train. Crazy Horse enticed Fetterman's soldiers to ascend a hill. Grumman's cavalry pursued the remaining 6 decoys up Pennow Head Ridge and ascended towards the Pennow Creek, when numerous Cheyenne women provoked the soldiers too. Now, at the same time, the Cheyenne chief Little Wolf and his warriors, concealed on the opposite side of Pennow Head Ridge, obstructed the approach back to the fort. Then the Lakota warriors charged suddenly over the hill and made an assault upon the army. Supplementary Cheyenne and Lakota, concealed in the buckbrush along the Pennow Creek, effectively encircled the soldiers. Well, it was all over for the American troops. Realizing their encirclement, Grumman sent his horsemen towards Fetterman. The united warrior forces of approximately 1,000 eliminated all the U.S. soldiers. And since then, it was subsequently referred to, at least by the American populace, as the Fetterman Massacre. It constituted the Army's most significant setback on the Great Plains up to that point. Never before had they had a worse day than that. Or at least not since the earlier times of the wars with Britain. It had been a long time. Now, the Lakota and Cheyenne refer to it as the Battle of the 100 in the Hand. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. There was more war to come. August the 2nd, 1867. The Wagon Box Fight, as it is known. Crazy Horse engaged in that one near Fort Phil Kearny. Here's what happened. A contingent of Lakota soldiers, including between 1,000 to 2,000 individuals, assaulted a wood-cutting operation in proximity to the fort. The majority of the soldiers retreated immediately to a circular formation of wheelless wagon crates. Reminds me somewhat of ancient Gaul, that kind of tactics. Now, they utilized them as cover as they engaged the Lakota with gunfire. Of course, the Lakota no doubt suffered significant casualties as the soldiers utilized the new breech-loading rifles. These could discharge 10 times per minute. Not like the old guns. The previous muzzle-loading rate was about 3 times per minute, and you had to train yourself up to get to that point. You know, the process of the big stick and putting the gunpowder down and patting it down and all this sort of thing. It's a little bit cumbersome. Once every 20 seconds is a pretty good fire rate for an old musket. Now the Lakota advanced after the troops discharged their weapons initially, anticipating the lag in reloading their antiquated muskets before they could fire again. So you see, they would hear this gunshot ring out and think, okay, we've got 20 seconds, let's go at them. But then all of a sudden, 5 seconds later, on comes another volley. Uh-oh, that's not meant to happen. Well, the soldiers incurred 5 fatalities and 2 injuries, whereas the Lakota, their casualties range from 50 to 120 at the higher estimates. Not a good day for them at all. And a significant number of Lakota were interred in the hills encircling Fort Phil Kearny in Wyoming. Well, in the autumn of 1870, Crazy Horse extended an invitation to Black Buffalo Woman to join him on a buffalo hunt in the Slim Boots region of contemporary northwestern South Dakota. Now, she was the spouse of No Water, known for his excessive alcohol consumption. That's why they call him No Water. Well, the Lakota tradition permitted a woman to initiate divorce from her husband at any moment she pleased, and she accomplished this by residing with relatives or another man, or by placing the husband's possession outside her dwelling. Just throw him out to the curb. Well, while some recompense may be necessary to alleviate the emotional distress, the spurned husband was anticipated to simply accept the wife's choice. I mean, what else is he going to do about it? Of course, No Water was not at the camp when Crazy Horse and Black Buffalo Woman departed for the buffalo hunt. No Water located Crazy Horse and Black Buffalo Woman in the Slim Boots region. Upon discovering them in a tent, he screamed out Crazy Horse's name from the outside, and when Crazy Horse responded, No Water brandished a pistol inside the tent and targeted Crazy Horse. Uh-oh. Touched the Clouds, the first cousin of Crazy Horse and son of Lone Horn, was seated in the tent closest to the entrance. He elevated the pistol as No Water discharged, redirecting the bullet to Crazy Horse's upper jaw. Now, No Water remains with Crazy Horse's kin now in fervent pursuit, and he rode his horse until it died, and proceeded on foot until he arrived at the safety of his village. And that's the account of what went down between Crazy Horse and No Water in a little bit more detail. Now, there was a number of elders that persuaded Crazy Horse and No Water to put their differences aside, and that further bloodshed should be avoided. As for No Water, well, he compensated Crazy Horse for shooting him by providing him with 3 horses. Personally, I would have asked for a little bit more than that, but, well, times have changed. Now, due to his association with a married woman, Crazy Horse was deprived of his status as shirt wearer, the war leader moniker, which, well, that is a bit of an insult. But hey, shouldn't have ran off with somebody else's wife. Now, Crazy Horse did get married, but it was not to the woman he tried to steal away. He actually wed Black Shawl at this time, an Oglala Lakota and kin of Spotted Tail. The elders dispatched her to treat Crazy Horse following his confrontation with No Water. And, well, I guess it was probably proximity. Crazy Horse and Black Shawl Woman entered into matrimony in 1871. Congratulations. And, of course, even better, they had the sole child. They are afraid of her, but as we mentioned, she passed away shortly after in 1873. And Black Shawl lived a lot longer than Crazy Horse did. In fact, she lived all the way up to 1927, unfortunately, amid the influenza epidemics of the 1920s, which managed to take out quite a few more than just her. Now, we talk now about June 17th, 1876. Of course, you may recognize the date. Crazy Horse commanded a coalition of over 1,500 Lakota and Cheyenne in a surprise assault against the brevetted Brigadier General George Crook's contingent of 1,000 cavalry and infantry, along with 300 allied Crow and Shoshone warriors during the Battle of the Rosebud. Of course, this is all the prelude to the big battle. Now, the skirmish, while minimal in human casualty, postponed Crook's integration with the 7th Cavalry, commanded by George A. Custer. It contributed to Custer's eventual defeat at the Battle of Little Bighorn, which we get to now. June 25th, 1876, at 3 p.m., Custer's 7th Cavalry launched an assault on a substantial encampment of Cheyenne and Lakota tribes near the Little Bighorn River, signifying the commencement of his final fight. Now, the specifics of Crazy Horse's conduct during the conflict are a little bit unknown, but we recount it mainly from the U.S. Army sources. The primary assault was spearheaded by Hunkpapa warriors under the leadership of Chief Gal. The tactical and leadership role of Crazy Horse in the war remains unclear too, although several historians do assert that Crazy Horse executed a flanking maneuver, the one that was enough to result in the demise of Custer and his forces. The sole verifiable truth is that Crazy Horse was indeed a significant player in the combat. Now, his personal bravery was corroborated by multiple eyewitness statements from other Native Americans. Waterman, one of perhaps 5 Arapaho warriors who engaged in the combat, stated that Crazy Horse was, I quote, "the most courageous man I ever witnessed," which is quite a review. He rode nearest to the soldiers, shouting to his men. Despite being targeted by all the soldiers, he remained completely unscathed. Little Soldier, a participant in the Sioux War, stated, "Crazy Horse was the most formidable combatant in the entire conflict," once again establishing a trend. Now, reportedly, Crazy Horse urged his men prior to the battle with the rallying cry, "Hoka-hey." The phrase, "today is a good day to die," is misattributed. Well, the earliest documented reference dates to 1881, with the phrase being ascribed to Low Dog. The English rendition is not a precise translation of the Lakota phrase Hoka-hey, but both expressions are employed contextually by Black Elk in the work we've mentioned, Black Elk Speaks. Now, on September 10th, 1876, Captain Anson Mills and 2 battalions of the 3rd Cavalry seized a Miniconjo town consisting of 36 teepees at the Battle of Slim Boots in South Dakota. Oh, and just before I do head on to, in case you're wondering, yes, I'll have a full video in great detail about the Battle of Little Bighorn. Okay, back to it. So, Battle of the Slim Boots in South Dakota. Crazy Horse and his adherents endeavored to liberate the encampment and its leader, Old Man American Horse, but their efforts were futile. The troops executed American Horse and a significant portion of his family, after they sought refuge in a cave for several hours. On July the 8th, 1877, Crazy Horse's warriors engaged in their final significant confrontation at Wolf Mountain against the U.S. cavalry in the Montana Territory. His people endured hardship throughout the winter, debilitated by starvation and the prolonged cold. Crazy Horse resolved to surrender with his band to ensure their protection and proceed to Fort Robinson in Nebraska. Of course, the last Sun Dance of 1877 holds considerable significance in Lakota history, as it was conducted to celebrate Crazy Horse 1 year following the triumph at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and to beseech divine favor for him throughout the forthcoming adversaries. Crazy Horse participated in the Sun Dance as an esteemed guest, but refrained from engaging in dancing, as was his style to not do so. Now, 5 warrior cousins offered their blood and flesh for Crazy Horse during the last Sun Dance. The 5 warrior cousins comprised 3 brothers, Flying Hawk, Kicking Bear, and Black Fox II, all progeny of Chief Black Fox, also referred to as Great Kicking Bear, together with the 2 other cousins, Eagle Thunder and Walking Eagle. The 5 warrior cousins were esteemed braves, recognized for their robust prowess in combat. Which leads us to May the 5th, 1777. Crazy Horse and other northern Oglala leaders arrived at the Red Cloud Agency, situated near Fort Robinson, Nebraska. In a solemn ceremony, He-Dog, Little Big Man, Iron Crow, and the others convened with First Lieutenant William P. Clark as the initial step in their formal surrender. For the subsequent 4 months, Crazy Horse inhabited his community adjacent to the Red Cloud Agency. The attention garnered by Crazy Horse from the army incited the envy of Red Cloud and Spotted Tail, 2 Lakota who had previously assimilated into white culture. Speculations on Crazy Horse's inclination to withdraw and revert to traditional lifestyles began to circulate at the Red Cloud and Spotted Tail agencies. In the August of 1877, officials at Camp Robinson were informed that Nez Perce, led by Chief Joseph, had escaped from their reservation in Idaho and were advancing northward across Montana towards Canada. Upon Lieutenant Clark's request for Crazy Horse, and the Miniconjo leader touched the clouds to enlist with the army against Nez Perce, they expressed their objections, citing their commitment to peace upon surrendering. One account of these events indicates that Crazy Horse ultimately consented, declaring his intention to battle until all the Nez Perce were exterminated. However, the statements were seemingly misconstrued by Frank Groard, a half-Tahitian scout, another U.S. cavalry scout from the summer of 1876. You see, Groard said that Crazy Horse declared he would proceed north and engage in combat until no white man remains. He didn't say that. Well, when confronted on his interpretation, Groard departed from those who questioned him. Another interpreter, William Garnett, was summoned but promptly observed that the scale was escalating in tension. Well, due to these issues at the Red Cloud Agency, General George Crook was instructed to halt at Fort Robinson. A council of Oglala elders was convened and subsequently cancelled when Crook received erroneous information that Crazy Horse had declared the night before his intention to kill the general during the meeting, right there at the dinner table. Just jump over and start stabbing wildly. Of course, Crook commanded the arrest of Crazy Horse and thereafter left, delegating the execution of his order to Lieutenant Colonel Luther P. Bradley, who was the garrison commander at Fort Robinson. Supplementary forces were deployed from Fort Laramie. On the morning of September 4th, 1877, 2 columns advanced towards Crazy Horse's hamlet, only to discover that overnight they had dispersed. Crazy Horse had escaped to the adjacent Spotted Tail agency with his wife, who was suffering from tuberculosis. Now, following a conference with military officials at Camp Sheridan, the nearby military installation, Crazy Horse consented to accompany Lieutenant Jesse M. Lee, the Indian agent at Spotted Tail, back to Fort Robinson. And on the morning of September 5th, 1877, Crazy Horse and Lieutenant Lee, along with Touch the Clouds and several native scouts, set out towards Fort Robinson. Upon arriving that evening outside the office, Lieutenant Lee was instructed to relinquish Crazy Horse to the officer of the day. Lee objected to this, however, and rushed to Bradley's apartments to discuss the matter. But unfortunately it was to no avail. Bradley received orders for the arrest of Crazy Horse to be executed under the cover of darkness and transported to division headquarters. Lee then surrendered the war chief to Captain James Kennington, responsible for the post guard, who escorted Crazy Horse to the guardhouse. Upon entry, Crazy Horse grappled with the guard and Little Big Man in an effort to flee, and immediately outside the door, in the struggle, in the panic, Crazy Horse was stabbed with a bayonet by a guard member. He was then transported to the adjutant's office, where he received care from the assistant surgeon, Valentine McGillicuddy. Unfortunately, late that night, he succumbed from his wounds. The subsequent morning, Crazy Horse's remains were entrusted to his aged parents, who transported them to Camp Sheridan and positioned them at a burial scaffold. The subsequent month, upon the relocation of the Spotted Tail Agency to the Missouri River, Crazy Horse's parents transferred the remains to a confidential site. At least 4 potential sites are indicated on a state highway memorial at Wounded Knee, South Dakota, but his ultimate burial site is undisclosed. And so what do you think? That struggle at the end, that was by the estimation of the one who bayoneted him, all because he was trying to flee. Do you believe it? Do you think it was perhaps out of frustration, or somehow pure hatred, that a bayonet was driven through Crazy Horse? Maybe. That's a bit of speculation that we don't quite know if it's true or not. But of course, controversy is, a lot of the time, just speculation. But what is not speculation is you clicking the subscribe button. Well, not speculation, perhaps desperation. Anyway, I'll thank my top-tier patrons and supporters both on YouTube and Patreon. Dark, Gary, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Erin, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fizabo, Legitimus, Maverick, and Susan. Thank you very much. And thank you for listening all this far. Didn't we have fun? Yes, we had fun. Of course we did. Good night, everyone. I never quite know how to finish the videos. I sort of end up just going on and on like this. It's okay. Maybe you're already asleep, I don't know. If you're not asleep, leave me a comment, eh? Tell me that you're awake, so I know that you're out there. Good night, everyone. As always, lots of love to you all, and do look after yourselves. You deserve to pay yourself a little bit of extra attention. Good night. See you next time.